Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome to the second day of NDSS, the second amazing keynote that will lead us through the day and give us a little bit of perspective. It is my great pleasure to introduce Herbert Bos from Vrije Universiteit. He's leading the VUSec lab there, and since the beginning of my research career in security, I've been a sucker for his research. I must say he's been doing amazing stuff all along. And when we actually met, that was in CCS 2015, so 9 years ago, I complained about the research he did and that his students did everything wrong. Obviously, I was young, I was foolish, I was pushy. He still worked with me, and the next year we had a paper together. So this just tells you something about his character, right? Despite me complaining to his students about doing everything wrong and the research not being correct, we still managed to chat and found a nice research topic to work together. And it's a great lesson for you to work with Herbert and to figure out how he runs his group and his people and the openness of all the research around it. He's been known for being somewhat a jack of all trades in system security. He started on mitigations with control flow integrity, covering binary analysis, looking at different ways how to protect applications in the presence of vulnerabilities and pushing really hard on that. As it turns out, like all of these mitigations are now in browser systems and whatnot. We both kind of failed seeing this as a compiler technique. We worked both of us worked on the binary analysis side of things, which is completely ignored today, but it was still a fun research topic. And then he moved into architecture security because binary analysis was apparently too easy for him, right? Source code is way too easy, binary analysis is too easy, therefore he started working on breaking the underlying hardware and microarchitectures and had great success with Rowhammer and a bunch of other microarchitectural attacks that resulted in 5, if I'm correct, ponies overall and lots of breakage all over the world. So I guess whenever he calls Intel, they're going to be super happy to hear about his most recent research. Today he's going to talk about corrupted memories of memory corruption, looking a bit into the history of exploitation analysis and all things considered. So I'm really excited about the keynote that he will give, and I would like to welcome him with a very warm round of applause.
Yes, thank you for the very kind words. They're extremely well deserved. So when Matthias asked me to give a keynote, I asked, what would you like me to talk about? And you know, both him and Christina said, we don't care, right? It's your topic, your choice. And so the title has become slightly different from what is in the program, Corrupted Memories of Memory Corruption. But really, this presentation is going to be about my favorite topic, which is me. I love talking about myself. I think it's fascinating for you to hear about me. So the next 60 minutes, I'm going to talk about myself and show you pictures from the family photo album. But you have to be careful with these titles because a few months ago, I also gave a keynote about a related topic. It was also about the relationship between the non-academic security researchers and the academic research community and the tension and hostility that exists between them. And the idea was that we don't recognize the non-academic researchers enough, and the academic researchers accuse the academics of just doing academic stuff, right? And it doesn't have any practical value. It's mostly useless. So that was the title of the talk, and this was the tweet about it, which was enthusiastically retweeted by my friends. So on the uselessness of academics. So you have to be careful, is what I'm saying. Finally, I want to say that this talk is relatively unimportant. This is my Cato the Elder moment. I do this. People who've seen talks of me recently see that I do this in every talk. I just want to point out that in the grander scheme of things, when we're faced with problems such as climate change and a global threat to democracy, this is really not all that important. Now, you're all quiet, but to me, this is the motivation for accepting keynotes these days. So I think it's really important. And I want to thank some people that I had extensive discussions with on this topic, in particular Sergei Bratis, Thomas Dullian, and Tadeusz Gruk, for all the insightful comments that they made about some of the things that I proposed. So I'm going to talk about memory corruption, and I'm going to talk about me and how memory corruption influenced my research and my life, and maybe also yours, because we've been working on this for quite some time now. This didn't spring into existence yesterday. It's been around for decades, and some really smart people have done some really smart things, and many of you have been working on these problems ever since. Okay, and so when I said that I was going to talk about the role of the non-academic research community to Sergei said, yeah, that's great topic. Just, you know, minor philosophical point. You might want to change the focus from memory corruption per se to harnessing emergent properties of memory abstractions. And as usual, Sergei is right, but it's a little bit long. So whenever I say memory corruption, this is, you know, you think harnessing emergent properties in memory abstractions. Okay, so what I hope to achieve is to at least recognize some of the work that other people have done, people who have pioneered this field and sometimes are not really seen that much. I also want to assess where we stand today and see if this field is still interesting. Is it mostly dead, and is it time to move to greener pastures? And maybe look forward a little bit where things are going now. Okay, so that's what I'm going to talk about. And memory corruption is a great topic for a general keynote because it's super simple to understand, right? So it basically means that if you have a long sequence of memory addresses, you want to make sure that you stay inside your box, whether it's a spatial box, right? So if you have an array, you don't go beyond the array boundaries, or a temporal box, you know, you make sure that there is a box when you access memory. As memory safety, and memory corruption is just like that, really simple. It just makes sure that you do not stay inside your box. So that makes it really simple. And looking at this and the developments in this space, I like to think of this as having multiple phases, right? So there's a phase where, you know, traditional memory exploitation was being used. There's a pre-phase where, you know, the earlier theoretical developments of this was done without there being any exploits yet. So what I want to do in the first part of this talk is look a little bit at this development from a historical perspective. Okay? So, and phase 0, like I said, is we know about memory corruption, but we don't see any attacks yet. Okay? And this has been around for a long time. This was nothing new. You know, even as early as the early 1960s, there had been work on memory corruption. For instance, in the form of the game Darwin, which was a programmer's game. You could build your warrior to try and claim memory and kill your opponent. And you had multiple warriors that would compete for the memory that you have. Okay, and this is a super old game, and it was written for the IBM 7090 assembly. But nowadays, if you want, it's kind of cool to do it. You can play it on the x86 assembly also. So you can download this and play Darwin. It was developed by, and here comes the pub quiz part of this talk, by these three people. Who are they? Anybody? At least one of them should be recognized. Doug McGilroy. Did I hear Doug McGilroy? Yes, excellent. That's the one on the right. Yes, known for what? Besides Darwin. Unix. Yes, well, even before that, Multics. Yep. Anyone else? Guy in the middle, Robert Morris Sr. And the guy on the left is Viktor Vysotsky. So they were all three deeply involved in the development of Multics. So Viktor Vysotsky was the technical lead of the Multics work. And they developed this game together, and it was solved, as it were, by Robert Morris. when he wrote The Ultimate Warrior That Could Not Be Defeated. So this was the winner of the game. Anyway, play with it, it's a lot of fun. Then moving on a little bit, so to the 1970s, early 1970s, there was a report by the US Air Force which explained in very clear terms what could be done with memory corruption. So it was authored by, the main author was James Anderson, and I think we all have heard of this. It sort of sounded a warning about memory corruption as a real problem. Then we move on to the next decade, and there was another game which was similar to the game Darwin to some extent, and it was played in an abstract assembly language called Red Code. You can still play this today. There's still tournaments today even. I'm not sure, did anybody ever try? Yes, yeah, Core War. It's a lot of fun. And it's a great way to learn assembly. So what year was it developed? Does anyone know? So I did not learn assembly using Core War. I didn't program Red Code. I used it, and I started learning assembly when this game came out, which was in the same year as Core War. So perhaps people can guess what year this game was developed in. It was for the Commodore 64 computer. Any guesses? 82, close? 84 is correct, yes. It's the same year that Core War was developed. And it was the reason why I learned assembly language. So it was cracked by this hacker group called Babysoft from the Netherlands, which was me and my two friends. And we didn't make any money out of this. We cracked this, and then gave it to our friends, made us popular in school. And what we would do is we would leave messages to the girls we liked in this game, thinking that this would surely make us really popular. So there were 3 of us, and there were many more girls' names, because we were not super picky. We would have been happy with any of those. And unfortunately, they've never seen any of this. They didn't play the game. It's really sad. Anyway, moving on, 1985, there was the first edition of the Frag magazine, which we all know. And the first edition did not have anything on memory corruption. It did, however, have a very interesting article about how to make acetylene balloon bombs, in case you ever need those. And then finally, in 1988, this first preface was finished with the appearance of the Morris worm, which exploited a buffer overflow vulnerability in the fingerD daemon. It did a GATS on a buffer, it overflowed the return address, and diverted the control flow. Okay, so this is what really started the actual practical exploitation phase of memory corruption. And so I want to focus on this phase a little bit more. But if you want to know the exact details here, I suggest, at least for the early phase, I would suggest to go and watch Haroon Meer's Black Hat talk from 2010, if I remember correctly, on which does a very extensive explanation of all the things that happen. Okay, so we're going to start with the appearance of Frag and the Morris worm. In the same year, there was also the founding of the first search in response to the Morris worm. Okay, very shortly after, there were a couple of mailing lists where vulnerabilities were discussed very actively. And this is where a lot of the ideas that we will see on the timeline appearing shortly were discussed and discovered. So in 1995, there was a post by Mudge, also known as Peter Zetko, who wrote about how to write buffer overflows. And there was, in 1995 also, a description of how to overflow the HTTPD program by Thomas Lobatich. Okay? And finally, in 1996, there was the article in Frag that we all know and all use all the time, and certainly in those days, the Smashing the Stack for Fun and Profit by Aleph1, or Elias Levy. Okay. The return to libc was proposed and described in 1997. There was a first defense on, against stack overflows in 1997 by Crispin Cohen, which was broken in the same year by Tim Newsom, which also started looking at code reuse chaining. Then there was work on heap overflows by Dildog, also known as Christian Ryu. And then there was a lot of work on heap overflows by the Woo Woo clan with Shook or Matt Conover, format strings, and buffer overflows on Windows. Okay, so this was the kind of the first 1.5 decades of exploitation in memory safety, which was interesting. Okay. Oh, and I just want to point out that in academic papers, in our papers, we generally cite only these two things, right? So the Morris worm you see a lot, and you see the smashing the stack for fun and profit source. We don't see a lot of the others. Okay. So what about me? So I'd learned assembly language for very useful purposes. What did I do in this time? And frankly, I don't remember. Right? So this was me. Entire decade completely forgotten. But I woke up again in sort of the early 2000s, and that was what I would consider the heydays of the memory corruption, traditional memory corruption exploitation. So there was work on bypassing, StackGuard, and StackShield by Bulba and Killer, which already looked at code reuse. Also, there was corrupting the vtable pointers. There was format string attacks again, but more extensively, exploiting non-terminated adjacent memory spaces. We also saw the appearance of the emergence of packs, which added page exec and ampertact in 2000. And shortly after, there was GR Security with Brad Spangler. And they teamed up quite a bit, and they did a lot of things together. So there was ASLR in packs, but they also did a lot of other things. I'm not going to name all of those because the slide would be too crowded. It's already super crowded. There was the work on voodoo malloc tricks, which, of course, talked about heap overflows, and especially exploited the Doug Lee's allocator, for those of you who've played with that. Heap spraying, the structured exception handling vulnerabilities. There was advanced return to libc by Nurgle, which is really a landmark paper, I think, or a landmark explanation. Very cool stuff. And also the non-stack-based exploitation by David Litchfield, which also talked about code reuse quite a lot. And then there was third-generation exploits by Halvar Flake, which talked about heap overflows and structured exception handling again. There was advances in format string exploitation and 4 tricks to bypass StackGuard and StackShield by Gira. Integer overflows by a whole bunch of people, including Mark Dowd and Halvar Flake. So it really heated up this area. People started tinkering with all sorts of variations of things that you could also do. There was an academic paper on the effectiveness of ASLR by Hovaf Shagam. There was unsafe linking of the look-aside list by Shook, so Matt Conover and Horowitz. Bypassing hardware data execution prevention by Matt Miller, now at Microsoft. And there was also the landmark paper on control flow integrity in 2005. It had been bouncing around for some time, but it was eventually accepted at CCS in 2005. Okay. Unusual bugs, which was null pointer dereferences, and showing that was exploitable by Ilya von Sprundel. There was double free, again by Shook. Heap feng shui by Sotirov. And then there was a paper on ROP, return-oriented programming, in 2007 by Hovaf Shachar. Okay. Application-specific attacks by Mark Dowd and zero allocation vulnerabilities. Anyway, a ton of things, and I've left out quite a few important things that simply didn't fit on the slide. And I just want to point out that, only this paper is ever cited, or is normally cited when we talk about return-oriented programming. Okay, so that's where it reached academia. Okay. So what about me? So I was actually doing research in this space at that time. I had started out as a young person wanting to, so this is the start of the real pictures of me. 1978, I really wanted to be a superhero, but my mom said there is no money in superheroism, so I became a supervillain instead, also known as an academic professor. University professors, clearly supervillains. My lectures are normally like this. And this looks like, a Beatles concert, but it's not. It's really more like the North Korean dictator being forcefully cheered by his subjects. And I realized that I was a supervillain, when I read one of the course evaluations where a student of mine said that I ended up breaking up with my girlfriend because I did not prioritize her because I was working on your course all day. But that's okay, don't sweat it. I would do it again. I don't know, that's not a good thing. So I decided to maybe lighten the load a little bit in the next years. And this was the first paper I published, I think, when I was a full professor. Of course, I was an assistant professor and an associate professor before. But the first paper I think I published as a full professor was a paper on memory errors, the past, the present, and the future. It was a fairly small paper. It wasn't a big thing, and I thought it was very interesting. And then we got all the comments from the non-academic research community, and it was a bit of a rain on my parade. I was more of a villain than I thought. So who are you guys? And it turns out that it's everybody else who was on the previous slide. Okay, and they felt that in general, academics did not recognize the work by the non-academic researchers. And that included me, even though we tried to do this. So in this, by the way, I should point out, it's a paper with Victor van der Veen and Lorenzo Cavallaro. We did try to actually have references to the non-academic research community, but of course there was a lot more that had happened and that we ignored. So what just happened, it was clear that not everybody appreciated academic research very much. How am I doing on time, by the way? Half an hour, okay. In years after that, I started following this a little bit, and I saw lots of discussions that kept coming back to this issue, that we don't appreciate the work by non-academic researchers. So there was a discussion on Twitter in 2018 about, how for double fetch vulnerabilities, there was earlier work which is always ignored by everyone, and people feel really unhappy about this. And also said, I'm so disappointed I no longer get upset by this. There was some suggestion that, the non-academic research community should write more papers and actually try to get those published. And they said, it's difficult. Dan Kaminsky said, it's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. And Halvar said, the academic community is not super bad as giving credit as long as it's only about the academic papers. Okay, and one of the reasons for that was that we, as an academic community, at least that's what the suggestion was, do not cite things if they're not part of the academic set of conferences. Okay, and the people who are not academic researchers will not be in the reviewer boards. And Matthias here, our PC chair, one of our PC chairs, argued that actually we should cite this, and it's wrong. It's difficult. Must be compared to the FRAC articles, and unfortunately, there is a lot of reinvention that's not necessarily maliciously done, but it is reinventions and being unaware of the earlier work, which is also bad. So that's also what I thought. It's simply being unaware of prior art, and maybe Alvar said, but there's actually a lot of stuff which is simply deliberately ignored. Okay, and Matthias had similar experiences with his own work. We've all had those experiences, I think, with our work. So yeah, there is a bit of badness in the community in that sense. Okay, so I thought, let me just go back. Yep. So I thought I'd look into this and start with a very concrete case that everybody's heard of and that always keeps coming up when we talk about not giving credit, and that is return-oriented programming, right? So it's always said that this was an academic paper doing stuff that was already done in the non-academic research community for a long time, and the credit was not given where it was due. So let's have a look. And I thought, even though it's not my paper, Hovaf would probably never do this himself, so I thought I'd do it on his behalf. And just want to go back, so we had this Smashing the Stack for Fun and Profit paper in 1996, and everybody talked about this, except me. I was traveling around Asia for 2 years. I bought a horse and a cart, and I was traveling around Tibet, smoking dope. So, I was unaware of this, but everybody else was talking about this, and when I returned, I also had a look at this. And the problem was that the trick that was used in the Smashing the Stack paper no longer worked, right? Because we now had write, exclusive or execute memory. So we had to do something else, and the trick was to reuse code that was already in the system. So you overwrite the return address with an address of a gadget, a chunk of code in memory that ended with the return, so you could keep doing this and you could chain them together. Now, Hovaf published a paper on this in 2007, and it's a highly cited paper, right? So it's cited almost 2,000 times. It's extremely influential. The question is, was it the first to do this? And the answer is a clear no, right? So it was not the first paper to describe the code reuse attack, right? So this work by Solar Designer in 1997 already showed how you could return into libc. Tim Newsom in 1997 in Bugtrack also described that you could control the stack and then thread through existing code easily. There was a full description of a ROP attack in 2001 by Nergal in the Advanced Return into libc Exploits, Frag magazine. There was the work by David Litchfield, and I misspelled that, non-stack-based exploitation, bovine killer, bypassing StackGuard and StackShield, jump-oriented programming on the Spark architecture in 2004, and then there was a very closely related paper in 2005 by Sebastian Kramer, okay, which was also borrowed code chunks exploitation and small chunks. So this was more like the ROP that, more closely related to the ROP that Hovaf described in his paper. Okay, so all of this had been done before, but were there differences? Was there still a lot of novelty in the paper? And I would argue, yes, there was actually a lot of difference with the existing work. And Hovaf explicitly described the previous work and how it differed from what he had done. And one of the most important differences there was that I think, also discussing this with Sergey and the others, that what he had done was basically framing this exploitability as a mathematical property that you could basically look at as a theorem. And this, drew in lots of academic research. So then you tried all sorts of different variations of this, and it really lent itself well for academic research. Okay, so it definitely had novelty, more than enough novelty. To me, this was a fantastic paper, and I would definitely have accepted it, and I would have honored it with the Best Paper Award because I think it was extremely influential and extremely good. But there is also the issue that we do approach this kind of research in a different way. So the non-academic researchers, whenever they have an idea, they want to develop something, they develop a proof of concept that serves as a demonstration of a more general idea, but it's a very particular demonstration. And it's always seen as, they've shown that particular thing, that one particular thing that showed as that basically served as a demonstration only, rather than the more general thing that they had in mind. So they're really bad, as Thaddeus Grug describes it. They really suck at making it clear that there's a theory X and a simple demonstration of the theory is doing only one particular part of that, X1. Okay, so that's bad. So also want to point out that Hova did actually cite the original work. He actually had the non-academic research community in the paper. So he got a lot of flag from the non-research community for, I think, the wrong reasons. At least in this paper, I think he did exactly the right things. He had a solid contribution and cited previous work. But there was a lot of anger in the non-academic research community because of being ignored for so long by the academic research community. Okay. And since then, we've all been citing, many of us at least, have been citing mostly Hova's work and not the earlier work by Solo Designer and Tyler Durden and Tim Newsom and who have you. Okay. Or, Kramer and so on. Okay. So I think, what we see is mostly not malice, but simply not being aware of the idea having been done before. It's completely separate communities that are unaware of each other. So I thought I'd ask around and see if this is a common thing, if there's a lot of unhappiness there. And I asked on Twitter, and I was flooded with messages. And I'm not going to show all the messages, but there was accusations about AFL, right? So not getting the credits that it should get. There was some, co-author of a paper who was explicitly told that they were not allowed to cite a non-academic paper because it was not academic enough. And I got a lot of unhappy messages that people showed that people were really unhappy, really angry about this. Okay, and also people were not impressed with academic research at all, right? So it's useless, or at worst, technically correct. Academics are the best trolls. They believe a lot of the bullshit that they spout. They write crap that nobody reads. We're in it for power and status. I rarely see a true scholar. What went wrong, right? So that's really bad. What happened? And just to be clear, we started out from the same root. So the original hackers at MIT were closely related to MIT, right? So something clearly went wrong. So that was the actual looking for reasons. I have a lot of theories about that. We can talk about that. But it was the topic of the other keynote. I just want to talk a little bit more about the hackers. And so what Halvor Flake mentioned at some point at Offensive.com, I think in 2019, is that these hackers are a little bit like the superheroes in comic strips such as the X-Men, right? So they have certain abilities that make them special, and they often don't fit in too well. So they are like the X-Men. And I thought, that's great. That's actually true. That's also us. Although perhaps we are less cool, right? So that may well be the case. But we have gone our independent ways. So we've had separate conferences now where initially, certainly, the academic community did not focus on attacks so much. It used to be super hard to get attack papers published. I was looking at the NDSS conference, and in the first editions, 1993, 1994, there were 0 attack papers. 10 years later, 0 attack papers. 2 2004, I think there were 0 attack papers. In 2014, there were quite a few. There were, I think, 13 or so. And this year, I think it's, if you count the fuzzing papers, it's 24 plus 6 or so. It's some 30 papers. That's more than the entire program in the early years. So they've really drifted apart in that sense. And there are many reasons why this bad blood may exist, and I don't think I have time to talk about that. 10 minutes, so yeah, I don't have time to talk about that. But the good news is that it seems that the communities are getting closer again. So the situation, even according to the non-academic research community, is getting better, which is nice. And so I'd like to go back to the topic that I really wanted to talk about, which is memory safety. And we've just had the first phase, so we have 2 more phases to go. And the second phase started in roughly 2010, but not quite. And of course, this is related to all of the other types of memory safety violations that we can have. For instance, hardware-based. So in 2012, Intel engineers wrote in a patent about this thing called rowhammer. Okay, so that's the first time we officially see something appear about rowhammer, which is another way to violate memory safety. And we mostly know this from the work by Owners Group on flipping bits without accessing them in 2014. So this sparked a long string of new publications about corrupting memory, or sometimes also leaking memory, where you're not supposed to be able to access them. Okay, the folks at Google Project Zero showed that you can actually use this to completely exploit a system and gain kernel privileges. Then there was work on doing this from JavaScript by we did some of that, and Theo Gras did some of that. And then a little while later, there was another major development. Oh, and by the way, I should say that the dedupe as machina also had another way of violating memory safety, and that was using operating system primitives such as memory deduplication, which allowed you to leak information such as, I don't know, information about ASLR directly with memory deduplication using a software-based side channel. And then there was, the third way of violating memory safety, which was speculative execution, transient execution, which was pioneered by Anders Fogh in a blog post where he described a negative result paper, which sparked a lot of positive results later on, such as Meltdown and Spectre, and all of the other things that appeared in the meantime. Okay, and I don't want to, the slide is full already, so I don't want to go into too much detail. But now we have memory corruption in many different ways. So we've gone beyond what we had in the first 2 decades or so of memory corruption, which was basically traditional memory corruptions. We have the traditional memory corruption on the left, but we also have side channels in software, such as memory deduplication and some other things that we can do. We have hardware-based side channels, such as cache-based side channels, but also other types of hardware-based side channels. We have rowhammer to violate integrity. We have transient execution. All of these things have now broadened the palette of things that you can do as an attacker to violate memory safety. So we've seen a huge number of publications in the last 10 years about this. Okay. And this is fascinating to me. So the way we've gone as a community from really minor things that people observed, like, oh, there could be a bit flip here, how cute is that, to, we can actually exploit everything and from anywhere is really mind-boggling, right? So this is really something that really clever people have tinkered with and played with and tried out new variations. It really is inspiring. That to me is something that I love about this community. Okay. But then there's the third phase, and I just want to put that in before I close, which is we now have all of these different ways to do memory safety violations. And we've been publishing papers on these things in isolation. But there's no reason to keep these things isolated. And a couple of years, I was looking into, can we actually combine these types of vulnerabilities and make them perhaps stronger? And this is what we've seen in recent years. And I would describe that as a sort of third phase of memory corruption. So all of these things can be combined in clever and creative manner to get more. So one of them is already an obvious one, right? So transient execution is combined with side channels. If you do Spectre, you do that automatically, right? But also, for instance, we've shown that people have shown that you can combine rowhammer with operating system mechanisms to leak information and corrupt that information. For instance, that was the case with the dedupe Machina work at Security and Privacy in 2016, but also Flip Feng Shui in Usenix Security 2016, where the mechanism of memory deduplication, if you have two pages of memory that are exactly the same, they get mapped onto a single physical page, was used as a way to help a rowhammer attack. For instance, if you can make sure that you have a page that is vulnerable with the same content as somebody else's page that you want to corrupt, right? Then that page will be mapped on the same physical page. And then when you start hammering your page, it will also, under the hood, corrupt the victim's page, right? So that really makes a rowhammer attack possible by using another type of vulnerability, another type of memory safety violation. Okay. So that is one combination. Another one is the combination of traditional memory exploitation, so traditional software exploits, with transient execution. We've seen quite a few papers in this space. So one of them was a paper that we did, the blindside attack, where we used the fact that under transient execution, you can simply probe memory without crashing, right? So you will never crash. So what you can do, for instance, if you want to exploit the kernel, is overwrite a code pointer or a data pointer, doesn't matter too much, but say a code pointer, and make it jump anywhere. And if you did not land on valid executable memory, tough luck, you will not crash, unlike with normal memory exploitation where you would crash. Okay? So you can look for speculative execution conditions, so maybe an if condition that takes long to evaluate in the kernel, and dereference a pointer, a code pointer or a data pointer, and probe anywhere. Just try and see if you get a signal of a particular cache line that gets activated, and then you know you probed right. And all the other cases, nothing bad will happen because now it's done speculatively. It means that all of the defense mechanisms that rely on crashing are suspect. We need to reconsider those because they no longer crash under speculative execution. One example of that is the Pac-Man attack in ISCA 22, where they used this for the ARM, bypassing ARM pointer authentication, right? So you have an authenticated pointer with a couple of bits that are set aside with protection, and only if you have those bits exactly right can you use a pointer. Well, if you don't have the right bits, you will crash. But you won't crash if you're running under speculative execution. Okay? So if you find those conditions, you can simply probe as much as you want until you get it right. And then you know you got it right. There's another one coming up soonish. Okay. And then there's the final combination, rowhammer and transient execution. We've also seen that in SpecHammer. Security and Privacy, also 2022, where basically you may have some condition that you could not control as an attacker, so you cannot use that for a transient execution gadget. But if you add rowhammer to the mix, you can still manipulate those bytes, and then you have a usable transient execution Spectre gadget. So to me, this is super interesting, and it basically means that all of these attacks work on the basis of something that you should not be aware of. Right? All of these things are under the hood, under abstractions that a software developer, according to software engineering as we do it today, should not be aware of. This is something that you trust. Okay? So the fundamental tenet of software engineering is that you can layer abstractions on top of each other and in that way manage the complexity of the systems that we build. But it turns out that all of these abstractions are leaky, right? And wherever the abstraction breaks is where the vulnerabilities occur. And we do this everywhere. I do this in the books that I write, right? So when I write about the operating systems, I basically say, here's an abstraction layer that we use. So there's an abstraction to make this awful interface something that is a nice interface. By the way, this is the latest edition of the book, and it was modified for political correctness. It used to say ugly interface, but that's not very inclusive, so we can no longer say ugly interface anymore. Now it's awful interface. Makes it much better. And so, but we do this all the time. So we need this abstraction and these layers of abstraction to make sense of this really complex system that we built. We need them to understand the world, but also this is where the vulnerabilities do arise. So, conclusions. I do think that the abstractions are both essential and also harmful. So this is where vulnerabilities arise. And nowadays, the situation is unfortunately such that even if you're a JavaScript programmer and you want to be absolutely secure, you kind of have to be aware of how your code interacts with every small component on your CPU and every small mechanism in your operating system. Okay? I think we've entered the third phase of memory corruption, where basically we combine all of these things together. I also think that we've treated the non-academic security community, whether it's deliberate or not, rather poorly. And it's time that we send our recognition to these pioneers that really have made this field possible in the first place. This is started out with them doing all these fantastic things in the 1980s and 1990s. Okay, so a model's proposal could be that we should always cite prior art, just like Matthias was saying, regardless of whether it's academic or not. It should not be because it's a non-peer-reviewed publication that we leave it out of our papers. We do not necessarily need to reject a paper because something is written on a blog post, but it should be definitely cited. Okay? And we should perhaps cite the earliest work rather than in addition to the more recent academic work. For the non-academic community, I think there's also a call to action. They should make their stuff more easily findable, because it's not some of this stuff, you really have to look hard to find it in the first place. Okay? Less models proposal, I think we should be more accepting towards papers from non-academic researchers, explain better what they need to do to get their papers accepted, and recognize some of the achievements that they that we should recognize them for. Okay, so maybe have some awards for the named after the non-academic researchers. All right, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you very much, Herbert, for the amazing keynote. We have a few minutes for questions. As always, state your name and affiliation and then ask your question. Thank you. We start on the left.
I'm Hamed Okravi from MIT Lincoln Laboratory. Herbert, excellent keynote. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So memory corruption is, memory safety rather, is often defined as sort of absence of some negative conditions, right? Not having spatial bugs, not having temporal bugs. Mike Hicks has an excellent blog post that sort of defines memory safety in terms of more capabilities. My question to you is, what is your view in terms of appropriate definition for what memory safety is?
Yeah, so I think this is very interesting work, and it's a good question, by the way. It's also there that I see a good role for academic research, right? So this is exactly where we are sort of the masters, right? We like to reason about these more formal formalizations of these properties. Although it's also happened in the non-academic research communities, right? So Halvar Flake had this paper and presentation about what is it that exploitation really means. So what is exploitation? What is an exploit? I stay away from that a little bit. So I'm really a systems researcher. I just tinker with stuff. I think it's super important, and I think it's crucial that people do worry about that, but it's not really the focus of my research group.
Thank you.
On the right.
Hanif Rahbari, Rochester Institute of Technology. Thanks for this wonderful talk. You mentioned about the drift between non-academic work and academic work, and I wonder, do you see any recent trends of drifts inside academic world, specifically between CS and non-CS communities?
So your question is, rather than academic and non-academic, within work that combines CS with other disciplines. In the area of harnessing emergent properties from memory abstractions, I don't see a lot of that I'm aware of, but maybe I'm missing stuff. Of course, in security, we see more and more. There's actually a lot of interesting stuff. We've branched out as a community to also incorporate a lot of policy-related work, human factors. So there is actually a lot of overlap between the pure computer science, the CS community, and lots of other communities. In the area of exploitation, I can't think of anything from the top of my head. Maybe other people know something that's happening there.
Raise your hand if you've been to DEF CON, Black Hat, or CCC.
Oh, but that's not CS versus non-CS, right? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Raj Rajagopalan from Vrije Technologies. It's very hard for me to be listening to this talk because I live exactly in that space you mentioned. I live between industry and academia. I try to work with academic researchers. I also have to deal with hackers, the so-called hackers, because I work for an IoT device maker. And we're constantly looking for new ways that people might be able to break our devices. But this problem of this distance between academic research and other kinds of security research is an old problem. So let me sort of borrow a page from your presentation and say, even this has been said before. That years ago we have said, John McHugh, for example, mentioned that 99% of the papers published in the top security conferences and journals are not read by anybody other than the authors and their students. So I had to look elsewhere to find a solution to this problem. And I looked to anthropology because it turned out, it looked like a human problem rather than a technical problem as to why we don't talk to each other. And my anthropologist friend, he looked at it and he said, you guys are organized in tribes. You're all tribes. You have, and what's the tribe? A tribe is a group of people who have a secret language, secret handshakes. They have initiation rituals. They don't talk to anybody outside their tribe. And they don't trust anybody outside the tribe. And so we, I think, need to recognize this and work on breaking down these tribal behaviors. We need to have papers like, I really like your proposal. I'd go forward even one step further and say maybe NDSS should have a hacker track. Invite them over, get them into the tent, rather than expect them to come on their own and find out about our research and talk to us. So I think this is a good sign that we're recognizing the problem, but we need to also do more to make that problem manifest and then open for solutions.
Yep, I fully agree, and I think you're absolutely right. We are tribes, and this is also one of the things that the hackers, the non-academic hackers community has indicated, that they don't currently know how to get into our community, right? So they don't know how to write papers the way we write them, right? So they try and they get rejected because there's certain ways and methods that we have that are not fundamental, that it doesn't take away anything from the quality of the work that they've done, but they haven't mastered that, so they are simply rejected. That's right. And were you from, did you say Riskure?
Resideo, yeah, I was spin off.
Sorry?
Resideo.
Okay.
I've spin off from Honeywell.
Yep.
Just very quickly, one other point we should make is that there is a pernicious distraction that happens, which is that my own engineers, who are not security people, they don't know which way to look. They don't understand the academic papers, but the hackers are not sufficiently detailed enough for them to use the work. And so I'm kind of the person who has to explain everything to them. So some work should be done in this as well.
Yep, I agree.
May I bring up like an advertisement for VUT, which is now a conference at Usenix this summer. The deadline is coming up in a few weeks. We do have two kind of tracks, the academic track, where you submit a paper, and the hacker track, where you can also submit your slide deck or your short write-up. And there's going to be some hand-holding to help you write an actual paper for the conference. So there are ways forward that we are pushing.
So here's Matthias stealing time from my keynote.
for an advertisement for the good cause.
That's right. I forgive you.
Hey, Lucas Drazel from UC Santa Barbara. So very great talk. I just had a quick question. So I think that kind of distance between the two communities exists in both directions. To me, it seems like it's mostly because of a difference in incentive focus. So, for example, I remember in incentive, how you gain recognition. I remember, I think a pretty well-known case is the AFL FAST paper, where there's a whole set of modeling of how a fuzzer works. And then they went back to the tool, and the author just kind of said, oh, I just changed these two lines and got the same result, right? And so there's a lot of focus on the tool building versus the actual modeling of how it works underneath and how you gain recognition. Is there a way we can merge those two, or is there always going to be that like tug of war between doing the slow modeling of the system and how it works and the actual just building of a tool that does it instead?
Yeah, so that's what the previous person asking the question also alluded to. I think we should try to be more inclusive and try to get that sort of track maybe in our community also. I think it is super useful to bring those communities more together. So yeah, I would be definitely open for that, and vice versa. And I do think that the non-academic communities are actually making moves also to be more open towards the academic research. We're seeing this at Black Hat. Quite a few of the talks are by academic researchers also, and there's a lot of appreciation for that. I do think that that all of the papers that we write are pretty hard to read for a non-academic crowd. There's so much defensive writing that makes them almost impossible to parse. But yeah, I do think that we should do that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Last question.
Yes, hi, Hugo Carmabon from Concordia University of. It was a wonderful talk. I just had a question. So we've seen memory corruption in the wild. As you saw, it's been like 30, 40 years, and it's still there, right? And so to what extent do you think that maybe it's time to move to more fundamental changes? And I'm thinking like, I don't know, for instance, the work of Gernot Heiser on the SEL4 the microkernel, or like even just some memory safer languages like Rust. Like, to what extent do you think these will actually maybe solve the problem once and for all?
Yeah. So it's a great question. It's the same question that I was asked in 2012 when I gave my inaugural speech as a full professor. They said, at that time, the question was phrased as, why don't we all switch to Java? We all know how that panned out. I do think there is actually a lot of things that we can gain by going to more provable security, right? SEL4 was just one of them. We've seen a lot of follow-up work where we use formal methods to prove properties that make sure that these kind of exploits are certain to no longer occur. Whether or not this will solve the problem of memory safety completely, I doubt, right? So because we've expanded the tools in the toolbox of the attacker to also include hardware vulnerabilities, and that makes it a lot harder to fully eradicate all of these things. But I absolutely am a big fan. So we have an assistant professor in our group who's exactly on this, working in this space. And this is where I see a lot of growth in the future also for our group. Yeah, I think this is super interesting.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you all for the great questions. Herbert will be around for today and tomorrow. Grab him during the coffee breaks in the hallway track to ask all your million other questions that you have. I know I will, so we can compete. Let's thank him again for this amazing keynote.
Thank you.